Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in with us on our continual study of the book of Revelation, this beautiful, fascinating book. And in this lesson, man, we're going to hit some pretty stiff challenges to us as we attempt to walk with Christ as we near the coming of Jesus to end this whole thing. So this is a good lesson, man. I've really been looking forward to sharing this. So because we do this every lesson, and also I think maybe because of the intensity of the stuff that we're going to talk about in this lesson, I want to start with prayer. So would you please join me as I pray right now? Father, thank you for your word. Again, we thank you for that every time as we study it. And because of the nature of what we will unveil in your word right now, my prayer is that you would give the hearers of this lesson a sense of perseverance in their faith, a sense of consistency. And Lord, your word talks about that so many times in there, about staying on course and not giving up and not turning around. And as fickle human beings, it seems like we live on the edge so many times, and the smallest thing can just throw us over the cliff. And we're going to find out how important that is in our study. And I pray that you will help me to communicate it well. And I pray for the people who will watch this, listen to these words, whenever that happens, Lord, whenever they listen, would your Holy Spirit give them a sense of importance about staying the course, about hanging in there, about holding dear their faithfulness to you. And my prayer is that just becomes so heavy in this study. So may your Holy Spirit guide me and help me to communicate that faithfully true to the Word, what the Word says. Help that to happen, Lord. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. Okay. Chapter 17, man, we are making progress, and we're getting to the 17th chapter, and there are some things that kind of start happening in the 17th chapter that tell us that we are getting closer to the end of the story. Man, if you've been with us in this whole study, this is the 30th lesson. So if you went all the way back to lesson 1 and you've been with us this whole time, you know, man, this has been a long study and we're getting close. Okay, we're getting close to the end of this thing. And there's a couple things that happen that kind of tell us that idea that we're getting to the end of the story. And one of those is that chapter 17 begins the 6th of the 7 sections of the book. And again, if you're a veteran of the study, you know that. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. But again, this is a beautiful, another way that we see this was a masterpiece of literature, the way it was put into these 7 different sections. And each section takes us a little closer to the end of the story. So when we get to section 7, which is not too far off, we're going to have there kind of the vision of paradise. So what we've been leaning toward, what we've been working toward, the 7th section, heaven. I mean, we're this close to the 7th section. So right now we're on section 6, which means that we are right on the heels of heaven. We're right there now. And we're going to find out how all of this is going to end. That's the 6th section. We're going to find out how good is finally going to victor over evil, how God is finally, for the last time, going to give the death blow to Satan. I mean, that happens right here. We're finally there in the 6th section, starting in chapter 17. So we're getting close to the end. Now, there's another reason, something else that comes up that kind of gives us the idea that we're nearing the end of the story here. And if you're writing something down, I want you to write this down real quick. And if not, just I'll try to help you visualize it. But the force of evil throughout the book of Revelation has been depicted in 5 different images, okay? So I'm gonna start like the 5th one, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and 1st. So I'm gonna go like that. Now one of those was the dragon. Okay, so the dragon represented Satan himself. So think of the force of evil starting with the image of the dragon. And then the next image was the beast out of the sea, which we called the anti-Christian government that has existed throughout all time. Okay, there's always anti-Christian forces of government. So we've got the dragon, who is Satan, the beast out of the sea, which is the anti-Christian government. And then thirdly, we have the beast out of the earth, which is the Antichrist, who has connection to the first beast, the anti-Christian government. And then the 4th depiction of evil is known as the great prostitute that we're going to study tonight, which was Babylon in the Old Testament, Rome in the New Testament. And then finally, the last depiction of evil are the followers of Jesus, or excuse me, the followers of the dragon who have the mark of the beast. So kind of watch this. We go dragon. We have the beast out of the sea, anti-Christian government. The beast out of the earth, the Antichrist. We have the great prostitute, Babylon, Rome. And then we have the followers of Satan. Now, here's what the book of Revelation does in reverse order. It shows how God starts destroying each one of these depiction of evil in reverse order. So the last one were the followers of the beast. The followers of the dragon have the mark of the beast on them. They were destroyed in chapters 15 and 16. We just finished that. So we're finding out that at the end of the world, the followers of Satan, those who oppose Jesus, they're the first people that God takes out. Then we move up the scale and we go to the 4th one, which was the great prostitute, Babylon, Rome. That's chapter 17. And that's such an important part of history that's going to come about when God destroys Babylon/Rome. You're going to find out about that tonight, that he gives 3 chapters to it. Chapter 17, 18, and 19. That's the 6th section. That's where we're at right now. That's how close we are to the end, okay? And then when we get to the 7th section, we find that God takes out the 2 beasts, the beast out of the earth, the Antichrist, the beast out of the sea, the anti-Christian government, and the dragon. And so all 3 of them getting taken out at the return of Jesus. I think it's almost like Jesus shows up and God has been taking out one at a time. And we get to the last section and Jesus just shows up and says, you know what? I've had enough. I'm going to take them all out in one blow. And so both beast and the dragon are destroyed in the 7th section. So I said all that. I hope that wasn't confusion to you and you're just kind of thinking, what in the world are we talking about? I said all that to say we're getting close. Okay, we're getting close to the end. And we arrive at chapter 17, the 6th section. And we have this depiction of evil, the great prostitute Babylon. And we find that God will destroy Babylon. Now, for you and I, when we're studying this in the 21st century, we mention the destruction of Babylon that is going to come about historically. And that may not carry much punch to it because we think, who's Babylon? What are you even talking about? But for the original readers of this, The first century Jewish Christians, the original people, they knew exactly who Babylon was. See, Babylon in the Old Testament was the number one primary nemesis of Israel. And so you might have heard, you might remember some different aspects of Israelite history. You may have heard the reference of Babylonian captivity, the time when Babylon attacked and destroyed the nation of Israel and took many of the Jewish people back into captivity as slaves in Babylon for 70 years. That was a big deal. So Babylon, in the mind of a Jewish person, was understood as the number one primary governmental world power nemesis and enemy of God. They understood that. And they knew that Babylon was this representation of how Satan would use world powers to come after his people. And so Babylon was just a symbol of how that is repeated over and over and over. In the Old Testament, Babylon was that actual country. But to New Testament Christians, they knew that the modern day Babylon for them was Rome. So do you see how Satan does that? Is he replicates this anti-Christian government throughout history to attack the church, to attack the people of God. So there was a time when it was Babylon. In the New Testament, they said, man, we're in the thick of Rome. Rome is the one coming after us. And they knew it, the first readers. They knew Rome was attacking who they were as believers and the values that they had as followers of Christ. Now, for you and I in the 21st century, we can think historically, well Rome's not that representation of Satan right now. And there are probably some of us who would say there was historically a time when that was Nazi Germany. And so what I'm trying to say is that when we arrive at the 17th, 18th, and 19th chapter, that what we're finding is that God will destroy this way that Satan works through history. These anti-God, standing up against the gospel value, these cultures, these societies that raise up in the world and attack the people of God. And there will come a time in history when God will say, enough is enough, and those societies, those anti-God, secular, humanistic cultures, they will be destroyed. They will be destroyed. And so it's very encouraging if you are a follower of God, if you're going through that right now, as the first century Christians were, they were being told here, Rome will not last. Rome will be defeated. And that's what chapter 17 is about. And it begins to give us, in the 17th chapter, a full description of Babylon. And you know now that Babylon can also represent Rome. It can also represent Nazi Germany. It may also at times seem to indicate America. And so we're going to find out in the 17th chapter that John begins to describe what Babylon will look like and what Babylon can do. And before Babylon is destroyed in the 17th chapter, we are told what Babylon will look like and how Babylon will act and attack the people of God. So we're going to kind of break the 17th chapter into two sections. This lesson's going to look at the first part when it says, here's what you need to be careful about with Babylon. And then in our next lesson, we will find out how God will destroy Babylon. But today is the first 6 verses of chapter 17 telling us who this Babylon is, how they act, in order to warn us to be careful with that. So, with all that in mind, let me read chapter 17, verses 1 through 6. Incredible vision here. Verse 1. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters. With her, the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. And then the angel carried me away in the spirit into a desert, and there I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. This title was written on her forehead: Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of those who bore the testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. What in the world is this about? Well, right off the bat, we find out that whoever this woman was, this prostitute, as we'll talk about in a minute, was connected to the beast. And we're given these 7 angels who had the bowls of judgment on the people who followed the beast. Back in verse 15, 16, we have this angel coming up and telling us about this woman. Who is this woman? So what we begin to find out here is that this anti-Christian government that will exist in many different entities throughout history has certain features about her that the people of God should be very careful about. And so what I'd like to do in the 17th chapter, in these first 6 verses, is I just want to give you some warnings of some things you and I ought to be very careful about that John reveals to us. For example, here's one of those. If you write these down, you can write this down. Beware of Babylon's prostitution. Beware of Babylon's prostitution. I think it's a little bit striking that John starts that way by referring to this person, this woman, as a prostitute. There's a few translations of the Bible. You might have one where you see in the first verse that she is referred to as a harlot. And if you have the old King James Version, it actually has the somewhat vulgar word there, whore. And so you have this John writing, be careful, because when Satan works through anti-God governments, secular humanistic governments who will oppose the people of God, that he will be referred to, he will act like a prostitute. Now let's think about that word. The word is actually porne. That's the Greek word there. It's where we get our word pornography. We get our word pornography from the Greek word porne. Now, porne, used throughout the New Testament, basically describes any expression outside the realm of a male and female marriage relationship. So we've got a male and a female who are in a married covenant, who have sexual relationships with each other for the purpose of enjoyment and the procreation of earth. And so that is the appropriate expression of our sexuality, male-female marriage. Anything outside of that, any expression of sexuality outside of a male-female marriage is referred to as porne. I mean, it's not anything more complicated than that. We've blown it up and made it foggy and all that kind of stuff throughout the years, and it's not any more complicated than that at all. Male-female sexual relationship in a marriage bond for the purpose of enjoyment and procreation. That's what God created. That's good. That's right. That's proper. Anything out of it is porne. Now, why would God, when he describes the way Satan will work historically through anti-God societies and cultures and government, why would he describe it as a prostitute, as porne? Why would he say that? Why would he say those governments act like porne? Why would he do that? Well, I think there's a couple of ideas that are connected to that in reference to prostitution. One of those is seduction. See, this is how Satan will tempt us, and it will intensify as we go through time, is that Satan will only tempt you with things that excite your senses, things that he will make appear to be good and right. So if you go back all the way in the book of Genesis and you saw when Eve was tempted by the serpent, do you remember that? It says this: when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree, watch this, was good for food and pleasing to the eye. That is the tactic of our enemy to seduce us, to make us think that things which are bad are really good. Do you think Eve would have been tempted if the serpent gave her an apple that had wormholes all? No, she wouldn't have been tempted by that. She's only tempted by things that seduce her, that are appealing to her. And that is the way Satan always works. He will always work that way. When he makes immorality seducing to us, he doesn't tell us the bad part of that. He doesn't mention anything about disease or wounded relationship or unwanted pregnancies. He just makes it look good, okay? The alcohol may appear to be soothing, okay, and enjoyful, and giving you freedom and unlimited enjoyment. That's why it may appear. It doesn't mention anything about maybe a DUI conviction or a job firing or a liver disease or a family break. Doesn't make you see any of the bad, okay? That is the mechanics of how Satan will seduce people throughout history. He lays before us something that will seduce us into thinking that which is bad is really good for me. There's another idea attached to prostitution, and that is unfaithfulness. So when you think about that, unfaithfulness. If you've ever attended a wedding ceremony that I have performed, you probably have heard me encourage this new groom and bride that when they put that ring on, don't take it off. Do not take that off unless you have to. Wear it as often as you can, because it tells everybody else you're not available. And it's also this constant reminder that I have covenanted, I have made an agreement, I have given a commitment to another person in my life. And the way John makes a connection between Satan's work and prostitution is because the very root of prostitution is breaking my faithfulness to God. It's I'm going to remove the ring. I'm not going to be faithful anymore. So we are called the bride of Christ, okay? And when we sin, whenever we sin, we are being tempted to take the ring off, okay? To be unfaithful to our bride, who is Jesus. So I think the whole idea of prostitution is brought up here because John is telling us that whether it be Babylon or Rome or Nazi Germany or even, God forbid, America at times, the way Satan will work as we near the end of time, and it will intensify, is he will use these anti-God cultures and societies to seduce us into being unfaithful to God. He will trick us into thinking that bad is really good and we can now be unfaithful to the Father. That's exactly what John is doing here. Is pay attention, church, pay attention, saints. That as we near the end of time, this will get more and more intense and intense and intense. You will be seduced. You will be seduced into being unfaithful. Now, I want you to wrestle with something with me. I'm going to do a little bit of a tangent, but I think this is important. I've often been asked this as a pastor, and I have no doubt that of all the people that watch this lesson, there are many people who have dealt with what I'm going to talk about in a minute, and that is the concept of if marriage doesn't make it and marriage falls apart, when is it okay? When is God okay with marriage coming to an end and then marrying someone else? And so when can divorce and remarriage happen within the guise of God saying, I'm okay with that? So when is that okay? And so pastors are asked that question all the time. Biblical people, scholars have wrestled with that through the years. There are undoubtedly many of you who've kind of played with that and wondered that. And I'm going to tell you the straight answer according to the Bible. There is only one clear cut. Did you hear that? Clear cut. Non-argumentative, okay? There is only one clear-cut case, incident, situation in which God says that he gives an approval to divorce and remarriage. There's only one. Now, there might be a million reasons we can think of why people get divorced and remarry somebody else. And the Bible only mentions one that God tends to allow. And that is if you are the faithful partner of another person who was sexually unfaithful to you. Whether we use the word affair or adultery or whatever, if you're the victim of that, you have the stamp of God's allowance, if you're unable to work that out, to that marriage come to an end and you to remarry somebody else. That's the only case in the Bible. Now, you and I can come up with all kinds of things that seem to make sense to us, all kinds of reasons why. Well, it sure makes sense for that, to free this up. And we come all kinds of different things that we can work our mind in. And I want you to know of all those different scenarios you can kind of think of, none of those are here. There's only one. And so it causes to ask the question, why did God only mention the one? Why is that? And I'm not even making a statement about all the other scenarios we can come up with. I'm not even saying what God thinks about any of those. I'm asking, why did he only mention this one? Why one? And why that one? And we don't have that answer here. Now, I'm going to give you my assumption, and it's only my assumption, but I think it's a pretty good assumption because of my history as a pastor for many, many years, kind of working with people who go through unfaithfulness in their marriage. And what I have observed is that for the victim, the faithful partner, that is perhaps the most horrifying feeling you ever feel in any of your life. It's the worst pain there is. And if anybody's watching this right now and you've been there, you're right now, you're sick to even hear that because that's exactly right. And my assumption, my thinking is is that God looks at that and said, hey, I made you. I know what's in you. I know what you're capable of. And most people you just don't have it to get past that. You might be able to get past a lot of stuff. Most people that's going to be a really hard thing to get past. And so if you can, I'm going to give you another option here. Now, why am I even mentioning that right here? Because I think that's why John calls this method of how Satan will work throughout history in these anti-God cultures. I think that's why he calls her the prostitute. Because they will entice the people of God to be unfaithful to God. And so God then becomes the victim of our unfaithfulness. And he knows what that feels like when we sin and are unfaithful to him because we're seduced by an anti-God culture. So John writes this and says, beware of that. Beware of that. I want you to also understand that there's another kind of, I think, description of this, and that is to be aware of Rome's peer pressure or Babylon's peer pressure. As we talked about the fact to be aware of her prostitution, now I want you to be aware of her peer pressure. And it comes up in the second verse, and you might have noticed that back there. It says that this prostitute is sitting on many waters. What does that mean? You probably have all kinds of times when we read through the book and we see an image and we go, what is that even about? Well, we wouldn't know what that was about if we weren't told it later in the same chapter in verse 15. So I'm going to jump ahead to what we'll look at in the next lesson. Let me read verse 15. The angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. And so what we're told here is that the waters represents many people all over the globe. Now remember, the first century reader, the book of 17, when it talked about the prostitute, they thought we're talking about Rome. He says Babylon, but we're talking about Rome. And what John is trying to say here is that Babylon or Rome will lure many people. They will trick many, many people. Masses of people will be pulled into and seduced by Satan. The longer we go in this world, the more people will be seduced into evil. That's a radical thought that comes up over and over in the book of Revelation. It's mentioning it here. As we move along in history, there aren't going to be less evil people. There are going to be more evil people. There are going to be more and more people who've been seduced and tricked by the seduction of the prostitute. And it almost becomes a culture in which there's a peer pressure going on. And so the idea is that if Satan can get a lot of people to think his way and believe his way, then the pressure will be so strong on the rest of the people, they'll just eventually give in because everybody's doing it or everybody's thinking it, or that's now the new right, okay? And there's going to be a peer pressure. As we move along in history, evil will convince more people, and those of us being faithful to God will become more and more the minority. And so will you give in to the peer pressure of an anti-God culture? That's exactly what it's telling us in chapter 17. As we get closer to the end, this is going to become more and more of a big deal. I remember reading one time, it reminded me of a university experiment, and I put it in my notes here. I can't remember the university. I wish I could quote that for you, but there was this experiment that this professor put on in this class who wanted to find out if people would buck under peer pressure. And so here's what he did. he brought in groups of 10 students. He would put 10 students in a classroom, and he would have two sticks. He would have a long one and a short one. It was really obvious. This one's a long one, this one's a short one. And he'd ask the 10 one, I want you to vote which one is the shortest stick. And so he would raise it up, and if you thought it was the shortest, you would raise your hand. Now, what the 10 didn't know is that there was one that was kind of a stooge. And here's what I mean. 9 of the 10 were told, when I ask for the shortest stick, I want you to vote for the long one. And so 9 of the 10 were told to vote for the wrong thing. And only one of them was not told that. And they were kind of the stooge. They were unaware of this. So 10 people come in this room, and the professor holds 2 sticks, a long one and a short one. And he says, tell me which one is the longest. And he points to the short one, and 9 hands went up. 9 hands go up voting, saying that a short stick is really the long stick. And the one stooge, the one that didn't know that we were doing this, looks around the room, and all 9 have voted for the wrong thing. And he slowly and eventually raises his hand with the rest of the group. And what the study found is they did that class after class after class after class after class after class, and they said almost without exception, a person would say a short stick is really a long stick simply because everybody else was saying that. It is the power of peer pressure. Now, what we are told here in this simple image is that anti-God governments, anti-God societies and cultures that replicate themselves throughout history, Babylon, Rome, Nazi Germany, whatever, who stand against the values and morals of God, who persecute the believers of Jesus, that the more of them who become, there will be saints who will buckle under the pressure. That's what that tells us. See, Satan knows that about our weakness, and he will tempt us to do wrong simply because everybody else is doing wrong. I remember I put in my notes when I was a teenager back in my day, the thing was for boys to have long hair. And all the boys had long hair. And my dad didn't think a boy ought to have long hair. And I had really short hair. And I always say to my dad, every boy has long hair. See what I was doing? Buckling under peer pressure. Every boy has long hair. I always remember my dad's beautiful response. No, every boy don't have long hair. You don't. But what I was doing was buckling under the pressure. Now, if you could list out on a piece of paper every time you sin, every time, I mean, just think about your last week, and I did this and I didn't do that, you'd find that many times we fall into sin simply because the masses have fallen into that. And so now we fall into it. I mean, everybody lies once in a while. Everybody cheats on their taxes a little bit. All my buddies swear. All my friends drink beer. Everybody breaks the speed limit. And so we think if everybody does it, then it must be okay. That's peer pressure. The great African-American preacher Tony Evans once said one of my favorite quotes. I've got it here on my paper. He said, majority opinion and majority behavior sometimes means nothing more than you have a bunch of fools gathered in one place. Be careful with this. Be careful with this. Be careful with peer pressure. I read a Fellowship of Christian Athletes newsletter a number of years ago, and there was a high school football player who was a devout Christian. And he was a monster at his high school. I mean, he was big and tough. He was an incredible football athlete, but he was a strong believer in Jesus. And so the FCA article was interviewing him, and they asked him, well, how do you deal with the peer pressure, man? How do you deal with peer pressure? You're a Christian in this environment. How do you deal with the peer pressure? And he said, dude, what are you talking about? I'm the peer pressure. And I think that's a challenge to us as a Christian community, is that we know the way Satan will work is to muster up the majority opinion, okay? He will muster up this idea that everybody now thinks this. Everybody does this that's wrong, so now you come on. The challenge for Christians is not only not to get sucked into that, the challenge for Christians is, hey, let's be the peer pressure. Let us be the peer pressure. Let us put the pressure out. We're not only going to not fall for that, we're going to put an opposing pressure. See how many of you we can get you follow us. So fascinating stuff of what we will see as we near the end of time. Let me show you another one. Beware of Babylon's parody. Now, we've talked a little bit about this, but I'm going to jump into it a little bit more here. When we get to verse 3, we've been introduced to, this prostitute. And then in verse 3, he starts to talk about this prostitute for 3-4 verses here with a lot of detail. And there's a lot of depictions of this person that I'm not going to get into, because I just want to talk about the overriding depiction that we're given, and that is that she is a woman. So this force, this representation of evil, okay, which he calls Babylon, the harlot, the prostitute, he now describes her as a woman. And why does he describe her as a woman? If you are a veteran of the book of Revelation, that causes you to stop dead in your tracks, because you know that earlier in the book, God used a woman to describe his people. He used a woman to describe the church. And the church is a feminine entity throughout the book of, or throughout the New Testament. The word church, ecclesia, is a feminine noun. The church is the bride of our groom Jesus. And so when we hear woman in the book of Revelation, we're thinking the people of God. Okay, we're thinking on the force of good. And now we're right in the heart of how evil will manifest itself at the end of time. And John calls that manifestation a woman. I thought a woman was good. I thought it was the force of the church. Now you're saying a woman is bad. Why are you doing that? What we're finding here is a form of what the beast will do to us, and that is that he will be a parody. That evil will be a parody. Now, if you think of the word parody, probably, again, may not be something we use all the time. I'm using it because it fits under the categories of the letter P, okay? Babylon, the prostitute, and then we talked about Babylon in the whole idea of peer pressure, and then Babylon in the sense of a parody. And a parody is a fake imitation of the real thing. A fake imitation of the real thing. If you live where I live in the Midwest, in this area of greater Louisville metropolitan area, there is a well-known radio host, a celebrity by the name of Terry Miners, who does parodies on famous people all the time. And he does a parody on the late, great former basketball coach, University of Kentucky, Joe B. Hall. And, it's just hilarious. And so he is a parody of Coach Hall, a cheap imitation of Coach Hall, and he does it for humorous purposes. Now, what we're finding here is a tactic of the enemy. The tactic of the enemy, again, is that he will make himself, even though he's evil, watch this, he will make himself appear to be good. And so the saints of God must watch that. We must be careful about that. That as we near the end of time, that anti-God governments, anti-values that are holy and pure to God, that societies that stand against him will make the evil that they represent, they will make it appear to be good and right. So the wrong thing to do is now the right thing to do. It's a parody. The evil thing to do is now understood as the good thing to do. It sounds a little bit like 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 14, where Paul told us Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. So that which is bad will appear to be good. Now, if you think about that very long, it'll haunt you. How many times in your life have you been fooled into thinking that something wrong was good for you? How many times have you thought about that? I think at times as pastor where I've heard people justify things that are wrong are somehow good for them. A married woman who believes, hey, God brought another man into my life because he treats me the way my first husband really should treat me. So that which is bad is now presented as that which is good. A businessman who discovers some kind of unethical tax loophole that is going to be able to dig him out of a hole. And so God showed me how to do this one thing here to help me here. That which is evil is now presented as good. A guy gets overlooked at a deserved promotion at work in favor of a less worthy person. And so God has kind of given me the strength to stand up for it and bite back and retaliate. And so that which is evil is now okay. It's good. All that we're being told here is that is how evil is going to muster itself up as we near the end of time. Watch that, saints. Be aware of that. Be careful with that. Faithful Christians have to be able to see through those tactics. It's one of the ways that the battle of good and evil will muster up and will continue to intensify. Now, let me show you one more example of this, and that is to be aware of Babylon's potency. And now again, I use the letter P, okay? So what are the ones that we've looked at? We've looked at Babylon's prostitution, Babylon's peer pressure, Babylon's parody, and now Babylon's potency, power, okay? And that causes us to go back to verse 6, and I want to read it again, and remember the context here. We're getting close to the end, okay? We're getting there, man. We're close. And John tells us, okay, we're now going to talk about how God is going to destroy Babylon, destroy Rome, destroy anti-Christian government. He's going to destroy all that. And he starts it by saying, now let me tell you how those evil governments will work, how that force will be upon the saints of God. Here's how that's going to happen. And in the 6th verse, he says this. I saw that the woman was drunk. Who's the woman? This prostitute here, okay? Anti-God governments, anti-God societies. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. The woman killed the followers of Jesus. Don't forget first century readers, because they knew this firsthand. Rome had made a sport of killing Christians. They had family and friends whom this happened to. And John is emphasizing, as we near the end of time, this cyclical intensification of the power of evil. And evil will defeat good on many, many battlefronts. It will not win the war. It will not win in the end. We know that. We've said it over and over. We're going to find it out in the rest of the book. But he emphasizes again that evil will become more and more powerful, seduce more and more people, wreak more and more havoc in the life of Christian people, and there will be Christian people who will lose battles. Anti-God empires will have seasons of victory. That'll happen. And it brings the age-old question of why God allows evil to have its day at times. You've probably been asked that at some point in your life. You probably have asked it yourselves. You can't watch the news now without asking, now, why is God letting that happen? How come that's going on? And I think there might be some places in the Bible that give a little bit of hints of why God allows evil to destroy good at times. Why does he do that? And I think there are some hints a little bit in the Bible. This is not the time to dive into those and spend all time with them. But I would like to give you one possible answer that is hinted at a few times in the Bible. And that is, are these moments of personal testings to us? So when evil wins a battle in your life, man, it's won a lot of battles in my life. It may have won your day today. So when evil wins its battles, could it be that those are opportunities where God really wants to know where we stand with him? Will we stand with him when he doesn't make sense to us? Will we stand with him when it seems like he's a million miles away? Will we stand with him when that which is evil tended to be more powerful than that which is good? Will we still stay there? Will we still be faithful? Will we still keep the ring on? Will we still hang in there? And I wonder sometimes if those things don't occur because God wants to know who we really are. Are you really mine? And we are reminded again in the 17th chapter, the beginning of the 6th section, nearing the end of the story, that evil will overcome good at times. But listen very carefully to this. This is the most important thing I know to tell you about verse 6. Revelation, the book of Revelation, does not end at chapter 17, verse 6. In verse 6, evil seems to be winning this thing. It seems to be ahead. But chapter 17, verse 6 is not the end of the book. In fact, hear this. Hear this. We're almost done, but please hear this. Chapter 17, verse 6 is the last time in the whole book when evil wins. This is it. And starting in the 7th verse of chapter 17, going all the way through the end of the book, we find out that evil may win battles, but it will not win the war. It will not win the war. And we start winning very soon. So here's a great thing to do. In your Bible, underline chapter 17, verse 6, and just write somewhere, this is not the end of the book. The faithful will win the war. And it starts happening next lesson. Don't miss it. See you then.